Better? All right. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be in the house of the Lord today. Welcome to BridgePoint Church. So excited that you are here today. As you can see, Pastor Nova and Miss Rhonda, they are not here today. They are in Missouri for a family reunion, having a good time with friends and family. Pastor also had his high school reunion, I think, as well. And so they're having a good time in Missouri. But this morning, we're continuing our series of Women of the Bible presented to you by the women of BridgePoint. And so it is my privilege this morning to introduce my sister, Shelli Adam. I'm just going to tell about my sister for a little bit because I can and I have the microphone. And I love her more than she knows. And I can remember in high school, whenever we was growing up, you always hated it whenever Shelli would come to pray for you, because 9 times out of 10 she had a word from the Lord to read your mail and tell you that you were a sinner going to hell. True statement. All the time. Because she hears from the Lord. Because she hears from God. Even then, she would hear from God. And even more so now. So I am excited to hear what the Lord has for you this morning. So here you go.
Yeah.
Good morning. I thought there was supposed to be a video from Nova, so I didn't know I was supposed to come up till Stephen called me. Hello, welcome to BridgePoints.
Yes.
Just winging it here, right? We don't do well when Nova's not here, apparently. But here we are. I am Shelli Adam. My husband Dennis and I have the privilege of serving in kids' church. We have been in kids' ministry for 13 going on 14 years since our oldest daughter was 1 year old. And we love kids' church.
Yes.
And we serving in kids ministry is the greatest blessing of my life. And before I get started with what I'm going to talk about, I want to tell y'all a story. And I'm not going to tell y'all who told this story because he may be sitting over here on the front row. But every week in kids church, we talk about what is worship? What does worship look like? And sometimes it's, giving God our very best. Sometimes it's loving the people in our household. And one week, one little guy, he was so adamant, call on me, call on me, call on me. I said, okay, what is worship to you? And he was like, not murdering. And I was like, you know what? Yes, worship can be not murdering. That is so true, right? So true. So today, I wanted to share that story because we are today going to talk about a story which involves murder. But this murder was actually an act of worship, which is very backwards, right? So we're going to talk about this, and we're going to, our story today is going to be in Judges chapter 4 as we talk about Deborah and Jael. And I have to tell y'all, the Lord is always so amazing to me. We actually, on my daughter's volleyball team last year, there was a girl named Jael. And so we homeschool, so part of our homeschool curriculum this year was that we talked about the meaning of names, and we learned that the first 10 generations in the Bible, that their names spell out God's plan from the very beginning. And I wish I would have now written it down, but I can share it with y'all later. I don't know it off the top of my head. But the meanings of their names, the first 10 generation, tells a story that God had a plan from the first man, Adam. And so we were talking about meanings of names one day, and one of my girls said, what do you think the name Jael means? And I was like, I don't know. So we started looking it up. So this was like in November of last year, and this story has been on my heart almost weekly since November. So while I could never be a preacher, because it's taken me since November to put all of this together so y'all get like one sermon a year, but God began speaking about this story to me in November and about the meaning of the name. And I always know for myself that before I can jump into a story in the Bible, I have to take a little bit of time to look back and see, like, how did we get here? Because the Bible as a whole is 66 books, but these books tell a whole story. So I struggle in my faith to pick up in Judges without knowing what went on in Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. So before I begin, I want to take a moment and let's just pray for today. Lord, I just thank you for today. God, I thank you for the opportunity to get to speak to all of these people, Lord. I thank you for your word, God, that teaches me every day something that I didn't know about you or something that I didn't know about myself. God, I thank you for this opportunity, God. I pray that the words in this story, God, would penetrate the hearts of those who need to hear it today, God, because I know, God, it's your word that proves to me that you are trustworthy. Because I see from Genesis to Revelations that you are a God who is trustworthy. You are a God who is faithful. God, I see in my own life that you are trustworthy and faithful. God, but I also want to take a minute and just say thank you, God, as we have this Memorial Weekend. God, we just want to stop and say thank you and take time to remember all of the friends and family and loved ones who have lost someone as a result of war. God, just we want to take the time to remember those people as well, God, that that's not lost on me either, God. God, that our country began with a fight, and there's still times that we're fighting today, God, and we just take the time to say thank you and pay respects and honor to those fallen soldiers as well. God, I just love you so much, God. I thank you for today, God, this beautiful day that you have given us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So we're going to land in Judges chapter 4. So if you want to turn there, but I do want to take a minute and talk about how did we get to Judges. So the book of Judges is about a time period in the Israelites' life where there is a period of 12 judges, hence the name Judges. Now these judges, they kind of had multiple roles. They wore many hats. They were political leaders. Some of them were religious leaders. They were military leaders. They were prophets. They settled disputes among the Israelites. So it was kind of an all-encompassing job. It wasn't just, oh, you're going to be a judge. But guess what? You may go to war. You may do this. You may do this. So this is the book of Judges. And as we see in the beginning of Judges, the first several judges, about the first 3 judges, are people of upright character. They're people who love God. They're people who God called them to help the Israelites. Because we all know the Israelites, can we all just say that we're just a lot like Israelites, right? That the Israelites, they always seem to get themselves in situations where I feel like one of the most common phrases in the Bible is, and the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, right? Because it's a repeating theme from Genesis all the way till the end. It's a repeating theme. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And I feel like there's times in my life that could be said of me, and Shelli did evil in the eyes of the Lord, right? We can all say that, right? We're not perfect people. So as we move through the book of Judges, there are 12 judges, and we see that they just over time become morally corrupt. And more morally corrupt, and more morally corrupt, till we get down to Samson and Delilah, one of the final judges, right? And so we look in Judges chapter 4, and this story is about the judge, and her name is Deborah. And a couple of things I love about Deborah. First off, she is the only woman judge, and as a mom who is raising all girls, I love a strong female character, right? Because I'm raising strong females who love the Lord, right?
Amen.
Strong-willed, strong physically, right? I'm raising those people. So I need strong female character or players in their lives to help them know who to be like.
Amen.
And so I love Deborah because she's a woman. I also love Deborah because if you have read your Bible at all, you know that there's not often that women are actually given names in the Bible. Because culturally, women didn't really have a place within leadership or within their community. They were not given a place of prominence. So the fact that Deborah is called to be a judge is really outstanding because that just doesn't happen. It happens so little that I listen to a podcast called The Bible Binge, and they just tell all the really cool stories in the Bible. And it happens so little that every time a woman is given a name, they play like this reggae horn. Because it's so rare, y'all. It is so rare that women are named in the Bible. Like the woman at the well. We don't know what her name was. How many women are at the well that day? We don't know. Like the Bible doesn't name these ladies. So the fact that Deborah not only is a judge, but also is named, is pretty remarkable. The next thing that I want us to talk about is Jael. And Jael is really where I'm going to land today. Because I recognize, I empathize with Jael. Because I believe that Jael was a woman who did ministry in an ordinary place. Her place wasn't extraordinary like Deborah, who was overseeing all of the Israelites and the whole mess that was at the time. But I love Jael because I believe that God has called me to serve in ministry in an ordinary place. So I want us to start with Judges chapter 4. And kind of as we go through, I'm a teacher by nature. That's what I do, both in career and in homeschooling and teaching kids church. So I kind of like to set the scene and talk about the characters or the players in this story as we move through it. So as we're reading just now, I'm going to give all kinds of input just for us to kind of make sense of the several players in this story. So let's start. Judges chapter 4, verse 1. It says, after Ehud died, and Ehud was the last judge, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. We've not seen that yet, have we? So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim, because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help. So who do we have here? So far we have King Jabin, and King Jabin is a Canaanite king. And that one thing to know about this specific time in the period of Judges with Deborah was that this was the only time that the Israelites' problems came from within their land. So they didn't do what God had told them to do from the beginning, and that was rid the promised land Canaan of all of the Canaanites. So they had already disobeyed in not ridding the land of Canaan of all of the Canaanites. So the Canaanites kind of reassembled within Canaan, and now they have King Jabin. So the Israelites had already disobeyed, and God was already punishing them in this story for their disobedience. Then we have Sisera. Sisera was a bad dude, y'all. Like, he clearly had the inside scoop on trade, and he clearly had financial means. He had 900 chariots, and I'm assuming the army to maintain 900 chariots. And in a time where iron and bronze and all of that was being used, but not widely, he had to have the inside scoop on trade somehow to be able to get 900 chariots. Let's pick up in verse number 4. Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapideth, was leading Israel at the time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera to the commander of Jabin's army with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. And Barak said to her, if you go with me, I'll go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. So now we have Deborah. She is the judge, the prophetess of God, that she stays in one area and everybody comes to her to have their disputes settled. She was the leader of Israel at the time, and God gave her a very specific word for Barak. And Barak says, if you go, I'll go, but I'm not going if you don't go, right? This reminds me of something like that what my children will do, and like walking, like for years we were scared of going outside in the dark, and like, I'm not going to the car right now if you won't go, but you better go with me, right? And that's what Barak tells her. But that's not what the Lord told Barak. The Lord told Barak to go. He didn't say, you and Deborah go, right? So one thing I know is that when God speaks to us and gives us something to do, and it's very specific, we must do it. We have to do it.
Amen.
There was a time in my life when I was almost 16, and I don't remember the whole circumstance behind the situation, but my grandmother, somebody had an emergency, and it was like 4 or 5 days, so I was going to turn 16. And my mom asked me to go pick up my younger brother from school, and I went to go pick him up from school. And sitting at the red light, y'all, either to go left or right, both which ways will take me home, but if I went left, the road was an old country road, and it was potholes and just all kinds of stuff. And if I went right, the road was smooth. And sitting at that red light, the Lord spoke to me and told me, you need to go left. And I was like, I don't want to go down that road, not in this car, that road is potholes. And he told me, go left. And I didn't. I went right. And you know what happened? I got pulled over by the police. Because my registration on the car was out. And I was only 15, so I got taken to jail. I didn't actually get put in a jail cell, but I got taken until my mom could come pick me up. And guess what? Had I listened to the Lord, I wouldn't have got pulled over by a police officer. Just one example. Okay, so we're going to pick up. So Deborah tells him, I'll go if you go. And I read a lot of commentary about Barak, and I don't know anything about the character of Barak. It could be that he had more faith in Deborah than he had in God. I don't know. It could be. I think it also could be that he trusted Deborah. He knew that she was God's chosen one, so he trusted her. So maybe it's going to make him feel a little better if she went with him, because then he would know, well, she wouldn't go if God didn't say go. Because Sisera had 900 chariots. This wasn't going to be an easy battle. It wasn't easy. And the Israelites, they were farmers. They weren't well off. They were farmers. So I'm guessing most of their weapons were shovels and hoes and rakes. They didn't have swords and shields. They weren't an army. They weren't military, right? I mean, the Battle of Jericho, how did the Israelites win? By screaming. They didn't have tools. They didn't have weapons needed for military battle, right? And so he said, so I believe Barak recognized God's hand was on Deborah, and he invited her to join him. And he knew if she went, God would go with him. And sometimes it's just easier to have somebody walking alongside you and go with you when it's something especially that God has called you to do. I can tell you, prior to marrying my husband, who, if you know anything about my husband, he's kind of party all the time. And he is the fun and the life and the laughter and the joy in our household. Everybody loves Dennis. And if I didn't have him, I wouldn't do kids ministry, y'all, because guess what? They're not going to be very impressed with me, because I'm not a party all the time. I'm not, outgoing and flamboyant and willing to do all the silly voices or wear big afro wigs or whatever. That's my husband. Prior to him, I never thought about kids ministry. Never. But going with him, I'm willing to go and do it. Okay, let's pick up in verse 9. Let's see. So Deborah said, very well, I will go with you. But because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours. For the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. And so here we have, they go, and they because Barak tells Deborah, I'll go if you go, what happens? He loses the honor of the battle. And back in those days, when it was a lot of fighting going on, honor in battle was a big deal. You didn't want to lose the honor in battle. But what does Deborah say? That she says, not that I'm going to get the honor, but the honor's going to go to a woman. And so they go and they do as the Lord commanded, getting the 10,000 men. And verse 11, now Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zananim near Kadesh. So we have another player in this story. So far we have King Jabin and Sisera, we have Deborah and Barak, and now we have Heber. And what do we know about Heber? Well, Judges chapter 1, verse 16 tells us that Heber was a Canaanite, and a Canaanite was a descendant of Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. And so we know from Moses, remember Moses in Egypt, Pharaoh, let my people go. Like Moses delivered the Israelites out of Egypt where they had been enslaved. But before Moses got to that point, he left Egypt because he had murdered a man, an Egyptian, for beating a Hebrew slave. And so Moses had left, and what does Moses do? He goes and meets a girl and gets married and serves his father-in-law Jethro, who was a shepherd. So the Canaanites were shepherds. And so Heber, we know, is a Canaanite. He's a descendant of Jethro. And what do we know about shepherds? Like, first off, they're nomadic, right? They live a nomadic lifestyle. They go wherever the water and the grass are. And this verse 11 actually tells us that Heber, he had left the other Canaanites. So he had pulled himself away and isolated himself away from his group, from his clan, right? It says Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites and settled somewhere else. So he had removed himself from his group. In verse 12 it says, when they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera gathered together his 900 iron chariots and all the men with them from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down to Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera abandoned his chariots and fled on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim. And all the troops of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a man was left. So they go, and God gives them great victory, just as he promised from the word he gave to Deborah at the very end. And one thing I love about this is the word routed. Looking up the word routed, it can mean to defeat or cause to retreat in disorder. So basically, it's kind of a fancy word for chaos. So the Lord just brought chaos down upon this army. And what happened when he did? Who was the first person to leave? Their leader, Sisera. He was the first one to turn tail and run. And so they go. Chapter 17, it says, Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because they were on friendly relations between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid. So he entered her tent, and she put a covering over him. I'm thirsty, he said. Please give me some water. She opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him up. Stand in the doorway of the tent, he told her. If someone comes by and asks you, is anyone here, say no. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground and he died. Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet with him. Come, she said, I'll show you the man you're looking for. So he went with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through the temple, dead. Good. On that day, God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites. And the hand of the Israelites grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, the Canaanite king, until they destroyed him. So this is where I want to really focus in on our story. So we see Sisera has fled, right? And where does she go? She goes to the tent of Jael. So a couple of things I want to kind of point out to you in this part of the story. I said, first off, Jael was a homemaker. In Judges chapter 5, it says that Jael is most blessed among tent-dwelling women. So that she stayed home because of their nomadic lifestyle. She didn't have a 9-to-5 job because she didn't know where they were going to be moving tomorrow. Not only that, culturally, women didn't have much of a voice during this time. So if Heber came and said, pack up, we're leaving, guess what? She packed up and she left. She followed him. This is how she finds herself away from her people, the other Canaanite people. She finds herself away from them. Because remember verse 11, Heber the Canaanite had positioned himself away from the Canaanite people. So they were nomads. So Jael would also be setting up the tent every time they went, right? Every single time. So Jael had to be strong, because to drive those tent poles and stakes into the ground would require great strength. I liken it to August in Texas. Like by August, the ground is dry and hard, and you try to drive a tent peg or something into the ground, and if it's not really sturdy, it's going to break, and it's going to require great strength. And so one thing I love about this with Jael and this story that I so recognize as a stay-at-home mama who homeschools is that Jael would be setting up the tent every time they moved. And God used the ordinary tools that were ordinary for her, to change the course of the Israelites. God used things that she was familiar with to kill Sisera, the commander of the army. And so that while Jael had moved away from her Canaanite clan, her community, that she was there, and that even though she had moved away, she still sided with the Israelites. And back then, they weren't fortunate enough to have the Bible written. But I know that we have learned, as we've studied ancient history, they had songs, and they had oral narrations and oral poems. And I know that Jael had to know about this God of the Israelites, even though she wasn't an Israelite, because she had heard about this God who parted the Red Sea and who brought manna and quail to the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. She knew about this God. So even though that she wasn't an Israelite, she chose to side with the Israelites. So I know that Jael, she found herself in a divided house. Her and Heber, they were not on the same playing field. They were not even in the same book at this time, because Heber was a friend of King Jabin, right? And Jael, she clearly was a friend of God. She just killed King Jabin's best man, right? So not only did she find herself in a divided house, y'all, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say she probably faced great opposition. I know if I was to nail my husband's best friend's next right-hand man to the floor of my tent, there'd be a little bit of opposition and tension in my household, right? And then when my husband, who's being a shepherd out in the field, gets wind that my wife just did what? Like, there was going to be a little tension, y'all. There was going to be some opposition. Right? She nailed him to the floor. Like, literally nailed him to the floor. Like, there was going to be some opposition and some tension. But Jael was strong. We've already talked a little bit about she was physically strong. She was setting up and tearing down those tents every day. And by doing that, the Lord was preparing her for the ordinary things and the ordinary ministry and the ordinary place where she was to be serving. I love the story in the New Testament about the loaves and the fishes. I'm going to give y'all a little insight into this story. The loaves and the fishes, the little boy who had the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, right? And God used that, blessed it, and used it to feed thousands of people, right? Can I tell y'all something? That mama didn't know when she made that lunch that day. Because how many of y'all mamas, we make lunches, right? We have made thousands and thousands of lunches. That mama didn't know when she made the lunch that day that God was going to take that ordinary place and that ordinary ministry and use it to bless thousands of people. She didn't know. And whether she made the lunch or she provided the money for the little boy to buy the lunch, she didn't know that her faithfulness being walked out every single day for hundreds of days, God was going to use those extraordinary people with ordinary gifts and tools to do something extraordinary. Because ordinary people with ordinary tools in the hands of my God can do extraordinary things. I also believe that Jael was spiritually strong. I think she probably had to be spending time with the Lord every day, because I have been fortunate enough to never have lived in a divided household since I have been married. The Lord has blessed me with a husband who is faithful to Him. I have never lived in that situation personally. I grew up in a home that occasionally it was really divided. And I've walked through that at a glance. I have friends who walk through that every day. And I'm going to tell y'all, that's hard. That is so hard. So I believe that Jael had to be spending time alone with the day. She had to be taking time to remember the God of the Israelites. She had to be taken because as I incline my heart to God, God reveals his purpose in me. And Jael had to know that as she inclined her heart to God regularly, that God had a plan. God had a purpose for her. Jael was also brave. And if there's one thing in my whole life that I can teach my girls, is to be brave. I want them to be brave. I feel like we live in a world where everybody is cowardly. We don't have a lot of people who are brave and who are willing to stand up for things that they see that are wrong. In verse 18, it says that Jael went out to meet Sisera. So she didn't wait for the enemy to be at her doorstep, y'all. She met the man out in front of her tent, right? So she was brave. She went out and she met him. She was going to meet her enemy. And that kind of bravery, I believe, only comes from faith in God and dependence on God. That my Bible tells me to armor up, to put on the full armor of God every single day. And in the world we are living in, if I am not putting on the full armor of God every day, I am failing. Because this world is lost. And Jael, she was armored up, she was brave, she went out to meet this man. Another thing to know about this is that it talks about that she invited him into the tent of Jael. That back in these days, men didn't go in ladies' tents, y'all. We can read in Genesis chapter 31 where it talks about Laban's tent and Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and Rachel's tent and the maidservants' tents. Everybody had their own tent, and you didn't commingle in the tents unless you were invited, and that was usually only a spouse situation. And so she invited him into her tent. So just the fact that she went outside the culture norms and invited him into her tent shows great, great bravery. I also believe that Jael had great faith. She chose to side with the God of the Israelites. She chose to side with my God by killing Sisera. She could have easily hidden him in her tent. And when Barak came by looking for him, she could have said, he's not here, because guess what? Barak wasn't going to go search her tent. He wasn't going to go in it. He wasn't allowed. He wasn't going to do that. So she could have easily hidden him in her tent and not faced opposition against her husband. She could have easily hidden him in her tent and allowed the Israelites to continue to suffer and to continue to be influenced by the Canaanite people. And great faith isn't built by coming to church on Sunday, y'all. It's built on Monday when you wake up and your kids are grouchy and your husband's grouchy and nobody's getting along, right? It's built on Tuesday when you have an issue at work or your internet doesn't work, or it's built on Wednesday by just being kind and friendly to the Walmart workers. It's built on Thursday by not being angry and having road rage. It's built on Friday by taking the time just to stop and thank God for the great week you've had, regardless of the week you've had. Because I believe that Jael had to be a woman of great faith, and faith thanks God in the middle of the story.
Amen.
Faith doesn't wait to thank God in the end of the story.
Amen.
Because I know of all the things in my life that my God is faithful even when I am not. And I have to live out my faith every single day. So God was faithful to the Israelites. And he used an ordinary Kenite woman to bring an era of peace to the Israelite people. He used an ordinary woman with ordinary tools in an ordinary place to change the whole course of the Israelite people. He used an ordinary woman to do something extraordinary. And I know that in my life, I'm not like Deborah. I don't have a big audience of people coming to me to settle their disputes, thankfully, right? I don't have a huge audience. God hasn't called me to serve in the corporate America. I worked in corporate America before staying home with my girls and had great opportunity, but I knew at a very young age that the Lord had called me to stay home. I didn't know when I went to college for a teaching degree that it was going to be to homeschool only my 3 children. I thought I was going to be teaching in public school. I didn't know all of those things, but I know that God is always faithful. And that while I may not have a great audience and masses of people, God uses me every day in the lives of the people in my household.
Amen.
God uses me every day in the lives of my friends' kids. Because guess what, y'all? Being a kid is hard. It is so hard. They face more today than I believe any other generation of people have ever faced.
Amen.
In the public school, and with sexual identity, and just all of the things that our culture is trying to teach them that are okay. And that we as mamas and daddies have to say, you know what, this isn't okay, and here's why. Because God says so. So I want to invite Sherry to come on up as we begin to close. And I just want to take a minute and just ask everyone to bow their heads. And I just want to pray. And if the prayer team wants to come up, we'll take time to pray for each other this morning, because there is power in prayer. There is power in the ability to call on our God. And I just want to ask everybody to close your eyes. And there's something I always say in kids' church to our kids, and that when we come to worship, we can have one of three choices. And I liken it to my house. When the Amazon man comes to my door and rings the doorbell, I don't go to the door. Or if somebody's trying to solicit something, I don't go to the door. I just let them leave whatever they have on the front porch. But if somebody stands at my door as a solicitor who's not going to give up and go away, I might eventually go to the door. But what do? I open the door and I step out on the porch and then close the door to keep the children and animals inside. But when my friends and my family come to my door, they don't have to knock. They're welcome just to come right on in. And that's what I always pray that my heart will be like. Lord, help me to be an open door, that I don't ever stop you from coming in. Lord, that you will always be welcome, that you don't even have to knock. And that's how our God is. God is so good and so faithful that the Bible tells us he stands at the door and knocks, waiting for us to open that door. So maybe today you find yourself in an ordinary place, in an ordinary occupation, and you just feel like God can't use you. I want you to be encouraged as we begin to sing this last song that God will use you. Maybe you're here and you feel alone because, like Jael, you find yourself isolated and away from the people that can be there to encourage you. Maybe you hear and you find yourself in a divided house looking for encouragement. Maybe today you just need an extra boost of strength and faith to be able to go home and face the battles that you face every single day. Maybe you need to pray for strength, both physically or spiritually, that God will give us strength. Maybe you're here and you're facing a situation that requires great bravery, that you don't feel like you have it. I'm fairly confident without the grace of God and Jael's trust in God, she wouldn't have the bravery she needed to go and help the Israelites. Maybe you find yourself in a place where that you're in a battle and you're in a storm and you're in a situation in life that you need to alter the course of the situation by stopping and thanking God in the middle of your story. Because faith thanks God in the middle of the story. Maybe you're in a situation where you've not been faithful and you need to get back and renew your faithfulness to God. Whatever the situation is, God can meet those needs. And if you have a need and you want to come up and have these ladies pray with you, please feel free. Let me pray. Lord, I just thank you for today. God, I pray, God, that today we would be encouraged and find strength, God, through you, God. Our faith would be renewed, God. God, that we would be brave and strong as we step out into this world that is so lost and needs you so desperately. God, I pray today, God, that you would bring encouragement to the people sitting in this place, God. God, that your presence would be so real to us in this moment. God, as we sing this last song, God, that we would worship you with open hearts, God, that we would always have the door to our heart open for you to come in, God, and change whatever you see that needs to be changed. God, I thank you so much. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Weapon may be formed, it won't prosper. When the darkness falls, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail. Oh, my God will never snow.